All right, so today we're going to do a deep dive into Bitcoin history. We're going to be looking at some of the most memorable transactions that really kind of shaped the whole journey. We've got this great article here called A History of Memorable Bitcoin Transactions from bitcoindepot.com. It was published on June 12, 2024. And some of these stories, man, they're pretty wild.
You know, it's interesting how these particular transactions, they really reveal so much about how Bitcoin's grown and changed over time. We can almost like trace the whole story,
Yeah.
from this like niche idea to this like major force in global finance, just by looking at who the key players are and how they move their Bitcoin around.
Yeah, it's true. It's like a history lesson, but way more exciting than any textbook. So let's start at the very beginning. January 12, 2009, the Genesis block. That's when Satoshi Nakamoto, that mysterious creator of Bitcoin, he sends 10 Bitcoin to Hal Finney, who's a well-known figure in that whole cypherpunk community and an early Bitcoin
Hmm.
adopter.
Yeah, that single transaction, just 10 Bitcoins moving around, it was huge. You know, it was proof that this whole decentralized system, this idea of peer-to-peer electronic cash, could actually work. It wasn't just theory anymore. It was really happening.
Okay, I mean, that's pretty cool, but I gotta admit, the story that really got me hooked is the Bitcoin pizza story. May 22, 2010, Laszlo Hanyecz, programmer. He decides he wants some pizza, right? But instead of paying with dollars, he offers 10,000 Bitcoin. And the crazy part, if he had held onto those Bitcoins, they would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars today.
It's crazy to think about. Makes you wonder what that pizza delivery person's thinking now.
Right?
But beyond that shock value, it's a great example of the whole risk and reward thing that was just built into Bitcoin's early days. People were just playing around trying to figure out what this tech could actually do,
Yeah.
and the value just wasn't clear at all.
Yeah, so it wasn't really about the pizza itself. It was about testing the waters, being a part of something totally new. I can see how that spirit, that willingness to experiment with it, that's what really helped Bitcoin grow.
Absolutely. Those early adopters like Laszlo, they were so important to proving that the whole thing could work
Yeah.
and building a community around it. They took a chance on something that a lot of people thought was just a fad, and they paved the way for it to become mainstream. But with innovation, there's always going to be risk. And Bitcoin in those early years, it had its fair share of challenges.
You're talking about the Mt. Gox hack, right? 2014, 850,000 Bitcoin stolen, worth what, about $450 million at the time. It was a huge hit to Bitcoin's reputation, especially for anyone who is still on the fence about its security.
It was a wake-up call for sure, for the whole industry. The Mt. Gox hack, it showed some big weaknesses, not just in the security of the exchange itself, but also in how people thought about protecting digital assets. People were still learning how to properly store and manage large amounts of Bitcoin. And Mt. Gox, it really showed everyone how important it was to have strong security.
So it wasn't just a setback, it was a learning curve. This event forced the industry to face its problems and find solutions.
Totally. That's where you see things like cold storage start to pop up, where you keep your Bitcoin offline so it's harder to hack,
Yeah.
and multi-signature wallets where you need multiple people to approve a transaction, adding another layer of security. These innovations, they came directly from what happened with Mt. Gox.
Yeah.
And they helped make the whole Bitcoin world more secure and resilient.
Okay, so we've seen the early days, the growing pains, the security issues. But then in 2021, things get really interesting. Tesla, Elon Musk's company, announces they're buying $1.5 billion worth of Bitcoin.
That was a huge moment.
Mm-hmm.
Until then, Bitcoin had mostly been like tech enthusiasts, libertarians, early adopters. But Tesla, that was a sign that big companies were starting to see Bitcoin as a real asset.
It was like a stamp of approval from the mainstream. All of a sudden, everyone's paying attention. I remember thinking, if Tesla's doing it, maybe there's something to this Bitcoin thing. But what were the long-term effects? Did Tesla really change how institutional investors saw Bitcoin?
I think it definitely played a role. Tesla investing, it sparked a lot of interest from other companies. We saw a bunch of companies follow suit, adding Bitcoin to their assets. It also helped grow Bitcoin-related financial products like ETFs, which made it easier for big investors to get involved with Bitcoin without all the technical stuff.
So Tesla wasn't just buying Bitcoin, they were a catalyst. They opened the door and everyone else started coming in. But not all these big transactions were public. In October 2020, there's this massive Bitcoin transfer, over $1.1 billion. And the crazy thing is, nobody knows for sure who sent it or where it went.
The scale of that transaction, it was unbelievable. And the fact that it happened anonymously, that shows you how unique the Bitcoin network is. It lets you move huge amounts of value quickly and securely. without revealing who's involved.
It's like a financial mystery. Was
Yeah.
it a whale consolidating holdings? A government moving funds? We
Yeah.
might never know. But it shows you the potential for innovation and, well, intrigue in the Bitcoin world.
Yeah, and that intrigue, that's part of what makes Bitcoin so fascinating. It's still young, relatively speaking. And there's so much we're still figuring out about what it can do and how it's going to impact the global financial system.
Right. Okay, so you've got these huge players, massive transactions. But then you also have individuals doing some pretty wild things with their Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Like during the 2024 halving event, someone paid a $500,000 transaction fee just to move their Bitcoin. That's more than some people spend on a house.
It's the perfect example of how the halving, which happens about every 4 years, creates a surge in activity on the network and drives up those transaction fees. But this case, it does seem like a bit of showing off, right? Like, hey, look at me, I can afford this.
Yeah, it makes you wonder about the psychology behind it. Is it just economics, bragging rights, a mix of both? It's almost like we're seeing a new kind of status symbol in the Bitcoin world.
It is fascinating.
Yeah.
And it shows how Bitcoin is having a cultural impact, changing how we think about money, value, even social status.
Yeah, it's like we're watching a whole new set of rules being written right in front of us. It's amazing to think like how far Bitcoin has come, you know, from those early days where people were just like, what is this thing? To these massive transfers that are like shaking up like the entire financial world. It's been pretty wild.
And we're still early. Bitcoin is still challenging like all those traditional systems, and its future, it's still a question mark. It's that unpredictability that keeps people hooked.
Speaking of unpredictable, let's go back to that mysterious $1.1 billion Bitcoin transaction we talked about. I mean, that really shows you the level of anonymity that's possible with the Bitcoin network. To move that much money and no one knows who's behind it, that's mind-blowing.
It's impressive and a little unnerving, right? On one hand, you see the power of decentralization and privacy in finance. But then you have to wonder about the potential for misuse.
Yeah.
Could someone use that anonymity for, like, money laundering? It's a tough question.
Definitely two sides to the coin. Anonymity can be a tool for good, but it can be abused. And as Bitcoin gets more popular, those ethical and regulatory questions, they're going to get even bigger.
For sure. Governments and regulators all over the world are trying to figure out what to do with this new technology. Is Bitcoin a currency, a commodity, something else? How do we balance innovation with protecting people and stopping crime? Those are the debates that are going to shape Bitcoin's future.
And speaking of shaping the future, let's go back to the very beginning, to that first transaction between Satoshi and Hal Finney. It's more than just them exchanging digital tokens. They were setting the stage for a whole new system.
Yeah, that's what makes the Genesis block so important. It was proof that a decentralized peer-to-peer system for electronic cash could actually work. And from that one transaction, a whole ecosystem has grown. New businesses, new technologies, even new ways of thinking about money.
It's like they planted a seed and it's grown into this huge tree with branches reaching everywhere, and we're still discovering all the different fruits it can bear.
What's even more amazing is that nobody controls this tree. It's a decentralized network run by a global community of developers, miners, users. And that decentralization, it's both its strength and its challenge.
Right. It makes it tough, resilient. But it also means that making decisions can be slow and sometimes a little messy.
Exactly. There's no one in charge to tell Bitcoin where to go, which can lead to, disagreements and debates within the community. But it's also that open, collaborative process that keeps Bitcoin innovative and true to its core principles.
And speaking of those principles, I think it's important to mention cryptography. It's not just some tech jargon, it's the foundation of Bitcoin's security and trustworthiness.
It is. Cryptography allows for secure transactions, prevents counterfeiting, and makes sure the network can't be tampered with. It's the math that makes the whole system work.
So when we say Bitcoin is decentralized and secure, it's not just marketing. It's based on these complex algorithms that make it all possible.
Exactly. And if you want to really understand Bitcoin, you got to understand cryptography.
Okay, so we've talked about the early days, the ups and downs, the big players, even those folks who pay crazy transaction fees. But what about the average person? What does all this mean for someone who's just learning about Bitcoin?
That's a great question. I think the main thing to remember is that Bitcoin is more than just a digital currency. It's a game changer that could revolutionize how we think about money and finance. It's still young, and there's a lot we don't know, but it's a really exciting space to be in.
It's like we're on the verge of something huge, but we don't know what it's going to look like yet.
And that's part of the appeal, right? The future of Bitcoin is being written right now, and everyone can be a part of it. Whether you're an investor, a developer, or just curious about finance, Bitcoin is worth checking out.
I totally agree. And that sense of exploration, that's what makes this deep dive so interesting. We're not just looking at transactions, we're seeing the trends, the innovations, the hurdles that are shaping the future of money. Man, we've covered a lot of ground today. From that very first Bitcoin transaction to those crazy halving events and mysterious billion-dollar transfers, Bitcoin has had one wild ride.
And it's not over yet. The exciting part is we're still just scratching the surface of what Bitcoin can really do. It
Yeah.
keeps changing, pushing boundaries, and making us rethink everything we know about money and finance.
Yeah, and one thing that's really stood out is how institutional investors are starting to accept Bitcoin. Like when Tesla jumped in, that sent shockwaves through the financial world. It was like a signal to everyone saying, hey, Bitcoin is a big deal.
It's amazing to see how that initial interest from institutions has developed. Now you see these sophisticated financial products like Bitcoin ETFs that are making it easier for everyone, not just institutions, to invest in Bitcoin without having to deal with all the technical stuff.
So it's not just tech people anymore. It's Wall Street, hedge funds, even pension funds, all trying to figure out how Bitcoin fits into their plans. That's a huge change.
It is, and it makes you wonder about Bitcoin's future. Will it become part of the traditional financial system? Or will it stay this decentralized, kind of rebellious alternative?
That whole back and forth between integration and disruption, that's been a theme throughout Bitcoin's history. From those early adopters who saw it as a way to break free from traditional finance to the ongoing debates about regulation and government control, it's this constant push and pull.
And that tension is probably going to stick around as Bitcoin gets more popular. We're already seeing governments struggle with how to define Bitcoin, how to tax it, how to balance innovation with consumer protection and preventing illegal activities.
It's complicated and it's changing fast. But one thing's for sure, Bitcoin is making us rethink what money really is. What is value? Who controls it? How do we guarantee trust and security in a digital world? These are questions we're going to be asking for years to come.
And that's what makes this such an exciting time to be involved with Bitcoin. We're watching a revolution in technology and finance happening right before our eyes. The choices we make today will affect the future of money for generations.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Bitcoin's history, I want to leave you with this. We've explored the past, the key players, the big moments that got us here. But Bitcoin's future is still unwritten. And you, as a listener, you have the power to be a part of that future.
Stay curious, stay involved, and keep exploring the world of Bitcoin. You never know what incredible discoveries are waiting just around the corner.
Mhm.
This is just the beginning.
That's right. And that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for